To our top story this morning, and Conservative leadership frontrunner Liz Truss is reportedly considering a radical slashing of VAT by 5% in order to try and help voters to cope with the worsening cost of living.
So my first reaction to that is how radical is 5%? We've got Malcolm Grimston now. Malcolm's a Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy on all this, and maybe you can tell us, Malcolm, 5%?
Well, I think that's talking about 5% right the way across the board, not just energy. Energy already has a lower rate of VAT at 5% compared to 20% across the economy as a whole. I guess the question with all of this is, things are going to be horrendous over the course of the next year. Government can do something about that, but shifting the burden from consumers onto taxpayers still leaves the problem somewhere in the UK.
It's a big problem. Nearly 1 in 4 adults planning not to turn on their heating over the winter. What do you make of that?
I mean, that presumably is if nothing changes and if no help is available. I think we've got to be very, very tight in targeting the help to those who need it most. The group of people I'm most concerned about are those on prepayment meters. Many of us who use direct debit, at the moment, we're building up a bit of money because we're not using all that much energy, and that's something which will be in the bank when it comes to the great increases later in the year. For those who are on prepaid meters, of course, they're paying literally sort of hand to mouth. They're paying as they go along. They're going to be horrendously hit there. So the real focus, my view, rather than trying to bring the overall price of energy down, for me, people like me, I'll take energy more seriously, and somewhere there has to be more money for investment to stop this happening again. But I think it's targeting at those who are going to face the most difficulty rather than a general reduction in
Mark, talking about radical, rethinks when we talk about this crisis, interesting to see that in a YouGov poll commissioned by the Times newspaper this morning, half of current Conservative voters would be in favour of renationalising our energy companies. Now, you wouldn't expect Tories to take a sort of socialist approach on this. Can you just give your reaction to that and also compare us to other countries? Because we're a bit of an outlier compared to many other European countries when it comes to this.
Well, there's a lot of variation. I mean, in France, the electricity industry is basically nationalised. EDF is technically a company, but 84% of it is owned by the French state. In Germany, it's pretty much all in private hands. In Sweden, it's always been a mixture of private and public ownership.
Is anyone else seeing the same sort of price hikes that the UK is facing?
Yes, they are. I mean, the basic price hike is caused by the international gas price. So the question is really what are different governments doing about it? In France, because they have a lot of nuclear, which hasn't been affected by this crisis, they've been able to cap the increase on energy prices by 4%. And that's been helped by the fact that it's a public company. But firstly, private nationalisation will be enormously expensive. If you do it at the point when the companies are very profitable, then they're buying them out is going to be very expensive. And of course, once they're in state hands, then they are competing for investment with the sexier things like the health service and the police and education. And experience of the past is that important infrastructure like the rail network, like water, like energy, does not get the investment it really needs when in state hands.
You keep saying that. You said to me earlier there, we've got to make sure there is money for investment. What do you mean by that?
Well, one of the reasons why we are where we are is that we didn't invest in nuclear stations 20 years ago, which could have then been coming online to replace the ones that are coming to the end of their life. We didn't invest in some North Sea gas, and we need to move away from fossil fuels. But gas is going to be very important for a long time because it fills the gap when the wind isn't blowing or when the sun isn't out. We didn't invest in the North Sea to the extent that we could have done, which left us very dependent on Europe. And, of course, when the European price shot through the roof, we were caught as much as anybody else by that. We do need some investment in our wires. If we're building a lot of offshore wind, we need a lot of new wires to carry that electricity to where it's going to be needed. And all these are big, big ticket items.
They're not easily solved or quickly anyway. Just on the North Sea issue specifically, we talk a lot about why haven't we done more in recent years to make ourselves energy independent and invest in North Sea energy. But, wouldn't that just be giving more money to BP and to Shell, which they then sell overseas, and we'd still have to then be buying it back? It wouldn't have put us in any more of a secure position.
Well, broadly that's right, but there are two things. So firstly, because it's closer to our market, then delivering that oil and gas into the UK is cheaper because you don't have the transportation cost. And secondly, anything which is bringing new supplies onto the global market will have a downward pressure on prices. Not enormous, because it would be a relatively small player. So it's not entirely the case to think that that degree will be there. But through the licences which are offered, it might be possible to put a special clause in new licences for North Sea exploration, which does direct the output towards the UK market.
Okay.
Malcolm, answer this for me. This is the thing I don't understand. The energy companies, we all recognise, are making phenomenal, indecent profits out of this. It's not costing them anything. They're just making money on all of this. Why then do we, as a country, then pay for their profits? Why are we, you slash VAT, but it's still coming out of the exchequer, it's still coming out of our taxes. Why are we paying and not them?
Well, I mean, first thing is the energy companies we're talking about here are not the suppliers that we buy electricity from directly. They're having a really bad time. Over 30 of those have gone bankrupt.
The suppliers?
It's the upstream. It's the oil and the gas industry. Now, that is an international business. We've already increased the tax on the licences for the North Sea very considerably, 25%, which does mean that there is more money coming out of those very heavy profits. But if you do get a single country which heavily taxes those, then all that happens is that the companies go elsewhere with their investment. We still end up paying through the nose because we're importing even more oil and gas. And if you're telling those companies you can't make money in the UK market, of course they're not going to invest in the UK market.
But there's only so many places they can go to find oil and gas. I mean, they just can't up stumps out of the North Sea and say we're not doing it here anymore, can they?
No, you're talking about long-term investment, but long-term investment is the issue with this. Yeah. There's still enormous potential for oil and gas fracking in the States, for example. Saudi Arabia, still the main, one of the major oil suppliers, has still not really cranked up its output to the extent it might. I think it's playing a waiting game to see what happens. And so there are plenty of places where you're quite right, not overnight, but in the 15, 20-year investment horizon with this, if that money is going to those countries, eventually those are the ones we're going to be dependent on.
Let me ask you this, as a research fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy, up until now, a lot of resistance, a lot of not in my backyard people about fracking, right? Do you think once the price really bites in the winter, that may begin to change people's minds about fracking?
I think it will. If you look at what's happened in the States with their fracking revolution, it has just been extraordinary. They are now energy independent. I don't think the potential in the UK is anything like as great in the States. They have these vast areas of land where nobody lives, where there's no political problems and where it's there. Here we do have some areas, such as the northwest of England, where we could probably frack a reasonable amount of gas. I've yet to be convinced it's actually a game changer, but there's no game changers with a problem of this sort of scale. You've got to look at anything that makes any sort of sense. And I suspect we probably will revisit fracking, but let's not imagine that that's a silver bullet.
It's not the one-size-fits-all answer. Okay.